as we dive deep this morning, I'm just ecstatic that I was asked. Barry was like, "Hey, you should really talk to Jocelyn about sharing with you," and I was just like, "Okay." And when he said "talk to," I went, "Okay, well, that means I have to twist her arm." And so just know that I am ecstatic not only to be sharing the Word of God and being used by God, but also to be doing it with my beautiful wife. And I'm just so happy to share. But one of the things I did notice or think about is last week I was watching the sermon because I do youth ministry. And so I got to hear how Barry and Colleen met. And I realized to most of you, you may not know the story of me and Jocelyn meeting and how our family started. It's kind of funny, if you ask me. If you ask her, she's like, "No, it's not that funny." Because here's what happened. I met Jocelyn. Actually, we were probably in the what would call taboo stage of life. I'm 4 years older than her, and I probably met her when I was probably 17, 18, and she would have been a junior high schooler. That was the first time I ever met her. Was not romantically involved. Just clearing that air. That is not what happened. But what then happened is we met at a summer camp. The name of it is Redwood Christian Park. It's over in Boulder Creek in the Santa Cruz Mountains. Don't you wish you were there right now, right? So anyways, and so I was, as a counselor, I kind of knew of her as a student. She was always really tall and always really athletic, and so she'd show up to all the sports tournaments during sports camp, and I was like, "Oh, that girl can ball." And so I was like, "Oh, cool, that's awesome." There's 6 foot tall girl who can shoot, and 6 foot tall girl who can throw down a volleyball, and it was, didn't really think anything of it. Years forward, passing on, she becomes a counselor as well, and I remember her. Don't really engage in talking with her due to the way life was going for me, and then there was a summer in which that she didn't come. And she was she was in her active volleyball schedule, meaning she had to go play volleyball at Oral Roberts, and she had to be there early for summer stuff. So she wasn't there, but her sister was. And my friend was very interested in her sister. And taking note, I was just like, "You look very familiar." And I went, "Oh, okay, you have a sibling who's older." And she said, "Yes, I do." I was like, "You should get her to come hang out with come on, come hang out." We were kind of doing these group dates type of thing. And eventually Jocelyn came out. Eventually I had Jocelyn help me with youth ministry here. She lived in Ripon, grew up in Ripon. And I thought, "Oh, cool, we're friends. We're all kind of hanging out. We're all friends." Getting a flirtatious vibe. So I was bold and finally went, "Hey, would you like to go to a baseball game? I know you like the A's. I like the A's. Let's go to a baseball game together." And she said no. And I was not devastated, but I went, "Oh, okay." I got the wrong vibe. Chalk that up for being a dum-dum. So all you young men in the room, you can turn a no into a yes, by the way, if it's done appropriately. And flash forward, we then went to summer camp together as counselors. We weren't dating at the time, and I'd mentioned to her, I was like, "Hey, listen, summer camp's going to happen. I'm going to do my best to not focus on our friendship, but be there for the youth kids." And after summer camp, she just fell in love with me is what happened, right? No. After summer camp we definitely realized, she kind of realized she was a little afraid. She'd never had a boyfriend before. And so I was intimidating to her. And so we, instead of just a random, I know, right? The guy who looks like Shrek, it was intimidating. Yeah, ogres are terrifying. So, anyways, I share this story because at that point, she, like I said, never had a boyfriend, but finally went, "Okay, let's have a genuine, honest conversation. Instead of you just asking me out to a baseball game, let's have a conversation of where do you see this going, what's going on." And from that moment on, we pretty much never stopped talking. And from there led to dating, and from dating led to me proposing and proposal to marriage, and here we are. Flash forward now, in November, it'll be our 10-year anniversary. Yep, it's good. Good job, yep. Here's the 30 to 40 or more, okay? So that's kind of our story, and at that moment, as we're talking about families, that's kind of the start of our family. I'll be real with you, as a single guy who was I'll let you do the math. 10 years ago, I'm 38. Had been a bachelor for quite some time. That was life-changing to me. and I didn't have sisters, so I've never lived with a girl other than my mom, and so it was life-changing to me. And one of the things that just kind of immediately arose was the idea that we're going to be talking about, and that is stress and managing your stress in a family life, in your immediate family life. And so I'm excited to share with you. We're going to be sharing out of a couple of Old Testament characters. If we're really honest, the Bible's not like, oh, family life and stress, and there's like a big old passage of verses. Just being vulnerable and sharing with you. But as you also hear from us, you're going to hear part of our story and what's been going on in our life, as many of you have been praying for us, and what that looks like now, and how God is just so faithful. And the other thing that goes with this is a message where that's saying you're preaching to the choir. Well, guess what? I'm the choir also. This is something I need to work on myself. So with that, Jocelyn, you have something you want to share, or you want to recap for us?
Yeah, first I'll say, not my comfort. I'll come up and sing all day, start to finish. So when he did come to me saying that Barry thought about this being a good idea, I was like, is he sure? But it's funny as you're sharing it, because it wasn't something that I had on my list. I never actually said no because I was like not interested. It was, I realized like the world would call it prude. I had never been in a relationship before. But tying into actually what we're going to be looking at today, I really do think that there was an element of blessing being passed down generationally to me, because I'd kind of been raised in a home to take that seriously. It wasn't just something willy-nilly. You jumped into all these and so it was one of those things that I actually found that to be like, I'm not just going to step into this willy-nilly. And so it was kind of a cool way that I think that God protected me for some reason in that state, because when we did jump in, it was pretty much like, no, this is it. And so it was all kind of uncharted territory for me. And these are some of the verses kind of like we'll be looking at. It was like, that was a huge challenge for me too. So anyways, recap a little bit about what Barry talked about last week. We were looking at it together, and kind of like Josh said, it's specifically looking at stress in the family, and we kind of honed in and kind of targeted in on immediate family, mainly because I think stress is something that's kind of, it's like, in my opinion, it's like the starting point to bigger things. Like there's other things going on, and we kind of create this masked word of stress. There's maybe doubt, there's failure, there's heartache, there's fear, and it kind of all together, it like creates this like stress that we kind of live with. And in that immediate family, it can be kind of tricky figuring out, like Josh, so there's nothing in the Bible going, hey, this is how you handle a family, and this is how you handle stress. And it really does more target as an individual situation. And so just some of the things that Barry talked about last week, he was talking about what it does tell us about like children, what God has called children to be, right? He's mentioned children, obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right. The chuckle of, we all love this one as parents. We think this is the greatest verse in the Bible. Our kids, on the other hand, I mean, even as a kid, as a child still, to my parents, I go, I want to fight you on that a little bit. I don't think it fully goes away. So I think it's kind of funny. Like we always tie it to our little children, but even as a still child, in a sense, I'm a child to my parents. I still kind of find that to be like, oh, I could still use that today. And then he kind of moved into what the Bible does call a husband and a wife to be. And when you really think about the marriage and the children, like that is really what makes up that immediate family. So it's really important for us to make sure that we are figuring out what the Bible is calling us to be in our role in that family. So the wives, submit to yourselves, your husbands, as is fitting in the Lord. And then husbands, love your wives and do not be harsh with them. The big key that was a takeaway for me last week as I was listening to Barry was this idea that there's always this tension between, like within the family, between what it should be and what we all live in. And you should be living in that tension regularly, recognizing, yes, we're all fallen, we're all going to make mistakes, but we're still called to do better because we're called to sanctification in Christ. That we should never, just because we know God can forgive and God can move on, that we should just be living in that state going, that's totally fine. He's called to sanctify us along the way. So that being said, we are going to kind of be diving a little bit into Old Testament, which kind of doesn't really line up a lot with this. This was all essentially New Testament. This is news to them at the time. This was all things that they had never heard before. There's this target audience of this is completely opposite to what you guys are experiencing here in this world. They divorced for no reason, things like that. And so it was kind of a big deal that these would be the things that would be told to the people on how to live for Christ as a family. And so we're going to be talking a little bit about how that individual stress can be taken into that family household. And so you really do need to be kind of recognizing that in yourself too. So,
yeah. And so this morning, the idea is managing our stress in our immediate family. Right, and how are we going to manage that? And as we look at our Old Testament characters, I've chosen 3. I could have chosen quite a bit, but I've chosen what I would call 3 of
all characters.
Almost all the characters in the Old Testament experience some form of stress. But I chose 3 that you could just kind of go, all right, we can learn a lot from. And the first one is that we want to talk about is Joseph. Joseph, of course, he comes along during the Genesis side, the early side of everything going on, and he has quite a bit of stressful things that happen to him. The one that I want to mention is found in Genesis 37 right here, 37 verse 16 and 18. He replied, "I'm looking for my brothers," this is Joseph. "Can you tell me where they are, grazing their flocks?" Verse 17, "They've moved on from here." The man answered, "I heard them say, 'Let's go down to Dothan.'" So he's getting, hey, where are my brothers at? Well, verse 18, his brothers, "But they saw him in the distance, and before he reached them, they plotted to kill him." Sounds like a stressful situation. His own brothers.
Stressful family.
Stressful family. Yeah. And he has a lot of brothers. Those of you who don't know, we're talking about 11 other siblings. And Joseph, being the favored one, kind of has a stressful start that we see in the Bible. Doesn't mean that we don't see stress at all beforehand, but we do note that this is probably the first time we've seen it in the Bible of a stressful crisis situation where his brothers are going to take him and sell him into slavery. And it's all because they're jealous and all because they're frustrated, all because of family dynamics that they are upset that they see this man, they see this young man, he's the second youngest essentially, that is now being raised up and honored by his father, to the point where I kind of want to tell Joseph, hey, you probably should have kept your mouth shut. That Joseph had a dream that one day all the brothers and even dad will bow down to him. And it's like, why would you tell them that already? Like, that's just not good family dynamics. You've added to the stress of the family. And he's also been given this coat of many colors, right? That's the Sunday school story. We read that in the Bible. It's funny, Jocelyn and Jameson read through the little kids' Bible, and they get to Joseph in the coat of many colors. They don't really get to this idea that his brothers wanted to kill him. Because, I'm just being real. It's a stressful, crisis situation. That's not the only time in which Joseph, of course, has stress. He goes from being sold into slavery to being placed in a home in which that the head lady, Potiphar's wife, wants to have relations with him, and he's running and turning and running the other way. Potiphar's wife is mad that she got denied, and so she makes up a story and says that, Joseph kind of, he came on to me. And he gets thrown in prison, also another stressful situation, stays in prison for some time, mind you, and along with being in prison, he hears of a couple of dreams from the Pharaoh and interprets those dreams. If he got those dreams wrong, that's also a stressful time, to the point where he eventually didn't get the dreams wrong, that Joseph then is raised up, and Pharaoh is essentially second in command in Egypt, and saves, borderline, his dreams save the whole line of Israel, because in that dream, the dream was going to be 7 good years and 7 bad years, and he told the Pharaoh that, so the Pharaoh was able to prepare, and there was a famine that came over the whole earth, essentially, and Egypt's the only one who had food, and of course, Jacob and his family end up going down to Egypt, and eventually bowing down to Jacob, fulfilling that first dream that Jacob himself ends up bowing down to Joseph and fulfilling that dream, that first dream that he had. And so we see that he had a stressful start. It's so interesting. What do you have to say?
I laughed because we were actually literally just reading this with Jameson a couple of days ago, and it was like, oh God, this family was so messy. There's like a whole chapter we all breeze over because we go from like, oh, he was sold, and then we skip over Reuben, and we skip over Judah, and then we climb back over to him being sold kind of thing, or after being sold. So Yeah, it was, as a kid, I brought myself to that kid's space in this story, kind of considering, because as a kid, you don't really recognize it as stress or some hardship. You're kind of just, it's an overcoming story. It's this idea that this man started as a kid and he overcame and God was with him. And when you read it as an adult, there's a lot, I mean, I think it's 3 or 4 times you see this hardship happened and God was with him. This hardship happened and God was with him. And so it was always this assumption that like, oh, he was good, he was confident. There was no humanity in him. He was a saint and he had it all together, and there was nothing that would have wavered him because he was confident in the dreams that he was telling. He was confident in what he was doing. But you read it as an adult and you kind of go back there and you're like, no, there was some stress there that may not have been so like obvious. You have to think back into human nature and put yourself in that space. And you do see that. He tells the man, right? He tells the 2 men in prison, for those that don't know, when he is in prison. So the prisoners share their dreams. And one is really good for that man, and one is not so good for that man. And they're not really sure how to take it. Poor Baker he's outed hard. But he is the kind Sunday school answer. But essentially, he tells them as he's leaving, they get out and do not forget about me, please, 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 don't forget about me. And as a kid, I always just thought that as I just saw this very like stoic man in prison going, thank you so much for listening to me tell you about your dreams, and now go behold and go tell Pharaoh, and I will be waiting patiently in prison until that happens. And that's probably not what was going on. He was probably dealing with, despite being very confident that God was going to care for him through it all, that there's stress that he would have been living with in the process of it all. So
yeah, and we see that in that basic human nature. Like being in prison sounds very stressful. It's not like it is, we see on TV and all that. This was pretty much a hole, right? Like it wasn't a good situation. And so what we can really glean from it is really, if we're really honest with us, there's no denying that stress is a part of life. Like it's like, duh, Josh, right? Like it's there, and acknowledging that. And what's so interesting is Joseph, up until the point in which his brothers came after him, probably hadn't figured that out yet. It's an interesting thing that he probably didn't have a care in the world. Hence the reason why he was bragging to his brothers about, oh yeah, one day you're all going to bow down to me. Like he didn't understand that stress was a thing. He was probably 16, 17, 18, somewhere in there. How many of you guys remember those days when the world was just your oyster? And yeah, nothing, not a care in the world. You could get by with whatever it was. And life was good. I mean, he was the favorite. He had the coat. He had the story. He had all the things. And I'm sure he might have, like I said, he maybe encountered that stress, but we don't see that in the Bible. And so if we don't see that, his brothers also didn't see that. And so his brothers, being frustrated and mad, going, man, this kid's got no care in the world. He's the favorite child. We're out here working. We're out here doing all these things. He's out here dancing in his coat and waving in our face. He just didn't get it. What's so interesting and what I see in that story of check me out is I see that this world that we live in, it engages and tends to live on the internet. And it's just a little side note, but I see that this is where social media, your Instagrams and Facebooks and those places like that, can be a little dangerous for people who struggle with the idea of comparison, because social media is that idea of Joseph and the color. It's the check me out, me at my highest and my best, check me out. And I know this because I went back. I'm not an avid poster. I use it more for groups and interactions, but when it comes to like posting and letting the world see everything going on, I went back and looked at what I posted last, and the last thing I posted was a Christmas picture with my kids, and before that was at Disneyland, and before that was a Christmas picture with my kids the year before. And so it's social media is us at our best. And sometimes that was kind of Joseph, and how he, in my mind, I see him engaging his family, going, yep, I'm the best, I'm the greatest. And that's where social media can be a dangerous point for us, because we are entering into watching and scrolling and seeing everybody at their best. You scroll through, and whether it's a funny video or a serious video, most of the time you're not getting vulnerability and frustration and anger. And if you are, it's in order because they're insecure and all they want is the like and the attention. They're not actually posting the videos of me at Home Depot telling Jameson to shh. They're not actually posting the interactions of stressful situations. And that's where social media can be a dangerous place. And I see that in Joseph in a sense that he was just letting the whole world know how good he had it. And that's really what Facebook and Instagram are all about. And I see that as something that can be stressful for us as people and consumers if you do spend time on it. That's just a kind of little warning side note I saw. The other thing that we see is that stress and the crisis can last a while. Joseph spent some time in that prison. Jocelyn had mentioned the cupbearer and the baker, and it didn't go well for the baker, and the cupbearer gets reinstated, and he goes, "Hey, don't forget about me." And it's like a little sentence there where Joseph spends the next 7 years of his life in prison still. And that stressful situation continued on in Joseph's life, where it wasn't like we read the Bible and we get to see the whole picture, and we flip the page and we go, okay, so Joseph had it wasn't that bad for him. He was in prison for a little bit. No. 7 years is a long time. It doesn't sound like fun. And guess what? Stress can last that while. And we know this together as we've been kind of going through as our family has grown. I believe I've shared this before, but I want to share it again for those of you who don't know. Me and Jocelyn waited a little bit to start our family. And in waiting a little bit, we then made the decision, okay, let's go ahead and try to have a kid. And it didn't take right away. It was probably 9 months to a year. And right around the year, I kind of freaked out a little bit, if I'm really honest, and being vulnerable. And I shared it with with one of the leaders here at the church, who just happens to what we call now the baby blessing. And I shared that with this man, and he prayed for me, and within 2 weeks we were pregnant. So it's the baby blessing. If you're looking to get pregnant and you're having a hard time, I got someone who'll pray for you. And he'll do it genuinely with his heart, and not because I don't know what it is. It's a touch. You can ask him. There's some people he's prayed for, and they've gotten pregnant. So God is so cool in that. But it was a stressful time. And then, of course, during Jocelyn's pregnancy, everything seemed normal until we involved, not to be mean to anyone who's a doctor or a nurse or anyone, but until we involved the doctors during your first pregnancy with our medical provider. They want us to come in and they want us to do this and check that, do deep measurements and measure Jocelyn's belly and this and that.
When you hit 30, supposedly, it's just downhill from there and having kids. Okay. So there's 1,000 problems that could happen.
That makes sense.
So, yeah.
And so we went in for one of those tests, and they took a measurement of Jameson while he was in the womb, and at the time we knew he was a boy, so we were calling him Jameson, and they measured some weird thing between here and here, like his neck, back, head area, and they go, oh, we need to have a talk. They pull us into a room, and they talk to us about our options, because one of the options could be that our son has Down syndrome, just by this little measurement. And being who I am, not the special ed teacher like my wife, freaked out. I was being vulnerable. I was stressed. And one of the other options they told us was never an option, and we were never going to terminate the pregnancy. But it was one of those frustrating, mad, stressful times going, God, really, is this the call you placed upon Jameson? And if I'm being vulnerable and honest, like I said, I freaked out, and I didn't let my wife see that. I didn't, just due to the nature of, like I said, she's a special ed teacher. She has more patience than anyone I know when it comes to teaching students. And so I knew she would be able to handle it. It was more like, would I be able to handle this? And as you know, if you've been around the church longer than 2 weeks, you've met Jameson, that is not his story. Not at all. Yeah, no, he's so shy. Yeah, no. So, and that's such an amazing moment. But it was a long period of stress for me in that situation, because that was around the 5-month mark, and we still had 4 months to go, and they wanted us to take another test so we could test Jocelyn's or the baby's blood, Jameson's blood, and it's very invasive. And I was like, no, let's not do that. And so for 4 or 5 months, I was wrestling with this idea. I genuinely believed that long period of stress for me in starting our family, I began to talk in dialogue with God, and I realized that was not the story. That was not Jameson's testimony. And what's so interesting is the idea that I struggled with, and when he was born was like, how many other infants were just completely under attack by the self-doubt that these doctors sometimes create in the womb. And I was just like, oh man, my heart breaks for that. And it was also that realization, from now on, probably until I'm done breathing, I will always be stressed about my children. It just will be. And we'll talk more about that in a little bit. Yeah, unfortunately. So that's kind of Joseph. The next guy we really want to look at is Moses. Moses had an interesting, we want to look at his response to stress, because I can relate to it, and you'll see why in a second. As we see here, the big stressful situation that I want to share is this one right here, found in Exodus chapter 2. One day after Moses had grown up, he went out where his people were and watched them at their hard labor. He saw an Egyptian beating a Hebrew, one of his own people. Looking this way and seeing no one, he killed the Egyptian and hid him in the sand. The next day he went out and saw two Hebrews fighting. He asked the one in the wrong, "Why are you hitting your fellow Hebrew?" The man said, "Who made you the ruler and judge over us? Are you thinking of killing me as you killed the Egyptian?" Then Moses was afraid and thought, "What I did must have become known." When Pharaoh heard of this, he tried to kill Moses, but Moses fled from Pharaoh and went to live in Midian, where he sat down by a well. Stephen's account of the story in Acts chapter 7, as Stephen later on in the New Testament talks about this. When Moses was 40 years old, so we get a little bit more insight, he decided to visit his own people, the Israelites. He saw one of them being mistreated by the Egyptians, so he went to his defense and avenged him by killing the Egyptians. Moses thought his own people would realize that God was using him to rescue them, but they didn't. The next day, Moses came upon two Israelites that were fighting. He tried to reconcile them by saying, Men, you are brothers. Why do you want to hurt each other? But the man who was mistreating the other pushed Moses aside. "Who made you the ruler and judge over us? Are you thinking of killing me as you killed the Egyptians?" When Moses heard this, he fled to Midian, where he settled as a foreigner and had 2 sons. And what's interesting is Moses also, very similar. You could just turn through Exodus and see the stressful moments that Moses probably would have encountered. And this one is one in which we see a response that, unfortunately, you'll hear why, but not why, but I tend to kind of relate. Stressful situation, and he ran. He thought he was being led by God to get the people out, and so since he felt that way, he thought, you know what, I'm going to step in and kill this guy, and they're all going to follow me. And that was not the case. And what I've grown to realize in my marriage, I can tend to want to shell up and or run when it comes to stressful situations. And what I realize is everyone kind of handles stress differently, because my wife, it's not the case.
Yeah, that was probably one of, we didn't have a lot, like we said, we didn't have a lot of stressors necessarily, individual stress, but actually looking at like coming together as a family and figuring out how to approach stressful situations that impact us all in the family was not something we really tackled until we started having kids. And I know that's like I totally get it now. I used to be like, wait till you have kids, and it's like that layers down into 1,000 different areas, including how you handle some of those stressful situations that come up. And so, we totally handle it differently. And I think that Moses is a good example here. I'm quite opposite. Not that I barrel into stress. I think the opposite of running away would be just like tackling it hardcore, like you're just determined. That's not me either. I think that there are those out there. I have friends that are that way. And I always am really grateful for them, because they're the ones you need kind of by your side sometimes to like weigh you out a little bit. But I talk a lot. I'm a talker.
I love it.
Yeah. And so if we're specifically within the family, right, like if we're evaluating it from a family dynamic, I might not be this way necessarily outwardly to other people. I wear it on my face like no one's business. So like it's been a crazy year for us. Nothing heavy, but it's been difficult, and it's probably worn. Like I am not so ignorant to think I don't walk into church on Sunday and mask it well. But in the marriage and the family specifically, I talk it out. If this is on my heart and this is stressing me out, like we are going to hash this out. until we are blue in the face about it. And we're going to not go to bed until we handle this. It turns into a fight, and we're still not going to bed because we can't go to bed angry. And so there's that going on. And it's interesting because it's like we were talking about this too, is if we are equally different, bringing that into our own family, I think it's important to recognize that we're taking what we were raised in as well to do that. My family did that. That was something that my parents felt very adamant about because their family did not talk. So my parents came to know Jesus and went, we're not bringing this into my family. We are going to learn how to overcome some of these stressors. My dad lost his mom and his brother in the same year. One a freak accident, one cancer, and it just really bogged the family down. And they did not handle it well. Still to this day, like I meet with my aunts, and like they don't really talk about it. It's not really some part of their past. And then my mom, like they were a product of divorce and infidelity and stuff like that. And so they brought into their marriage, we're gonna know Christ, and we're gonna have an open family, and we're gonna learn how to overcome this. To a fault. I laugh about sometimes there's, in all good things come potential taking it too far. And we've even talked about this as adults, my siblings, even mom and dad. It's like, yeah, sometimes we do it to a fault. We make problems where they don't need to be because we feel like we got to hash it out and talk it out. So you bring that into a marriage and a family dynamic that did not do that. Yeah. And he's like, I need a break. This is stressing me out. And he bolts. And I'm going, what did I marry?
Yeah. Give me 5 minutes, please.
We're going to fall apart. And no, we ended up, it took some time to kind of realize, like, if you are able to consciously go, we handle this differently, and maybe go recognize that you bring things into your family, you bring things into your marriage that might have come from what is now considered your extended family, bringing it in and going, okay, we had to make a conscious effort to recognize we handle those stressful situations differently so that when we approach that together, okay, listen, can we talk about this for 5 minutes is usually how we land. Yep. And if we can't quite get somewhere, then let's take a break and I need 5 minutes and I'm going to go just take a walk and then we'll come back. And so we had to consciously put that into place because it did kind of turn into a lot of big, heavy arguments, all from little stressors. I mean, these aren't even big stressors, but we started realizing how important recognizing staying united as a couple under the umbrella of what he's called a family to be, because it's not easy. And those little stressors can turn into big stressors, can turn into big problems. And so we just found that to be really helpful, recognizing that we do handle those things different. And, we like considering family, like we never, if you are single or that's not going on, like that's still going to be something that you can consider, in my opinion, in how you're raising your family and how you're handling your family, because there's still pieces from what you were raised in that you can bring in. You may not be partnering with somebody to do it, but those are still things that are, I think, important to consider in how you handle the family dynamic of that immediate family. So anyway, but yeah, so in considering that, we kind of, if you're bringing it back to family and dialing into stress within the family, like Josh said, children, we landed on immediate family for this reason. And when we say immediate family, we're talking, this is you and your spouse if you're married, you and your children if you're not, that is the now immediate family. And we'll talk about that in a little bit on what God has called that to be. But when you add the children, like now it's officially a family, right? And so those children are quite often, in my opinion, the greatest stressors of what bring into a family, and not even necessarily that they're always making bad choices. You love them deeply, and so you both have a different idea on what is going to be best for them, and kind of coming to that together. And so those can be stressors that rise up. And we've been feeling like it's really important that we recognize that if we are created differently, and we're bringing that into our family and recognizing that we handle stress differently, then our kids are uniquely made as well. And we can't always just assume this is how, yes, this is how things go down in our family, jump on board or not to some situations, but they're going to handle stress differently than we would. And they're going to potentially internalize stress or handle that stress happening when they're young differently, when they get older differently, age takes a toll and all that. So like when you're looking at Ephesians 2:10, just understanding that like when he tells us that we are God's handiwork, that means that we are perfectly created the way he wanted us created, but we are in a sinful world, so we're going to deal with stress, and we're going to handle stress differently. And we've been even recognizing that in our own family right now with the little ones. when we have stress, they handle that stress, and they're recognizing it, and they don't even know at this age that that's what they're dealing with or watching. And so we just kind of recognize that, like, if we're all that unique, then we have to be considering that with our kids as well, because they are going to be a heightened stressor in a family. And I know it doesn't necessarily say in the Bible, but I mean, Josh and I have been working. Let me rephrase that. I've got a long way to go. I know I'm young and I've got a ton more experience ahead of me when it deals with my own kids. Just a little bit of experience I've had in the last decade and a half, teaching, coaching, dealing with junior high kids, little kids, high school kids. I mean, you're almost always going to see that, like, those kids are going to be the greatest impact of what makes a marriage fall apart. They're going to be a heavy piece on what brings the stress into the home, whether it be simple, like the activities they do, or maybe the hardships they're experiencing. So we're not going to be examining, like, moving forward, considering the family. There's 1,000 different things we know could bring stress into a family. And I know that it's not always kids, but we're going to specifically be examining kids because that's what we have experienced ourselves lately. And
we both have different approaches to that.
Correct. Yeah. We've had some different, Jameson is going to grow up and he's going to be a basketball player. And I'm like, meh.
Hey.
I know. I am that weird one that's like, I was an athlete and it seems very obvious. I have friends and family all the time like, oh, you're going to be pushing your kids to get into sports. And I'm like, I don't know. That is not always a healthy environment for my kids, for kids in general. I see it all the time. And so, but that's my experiences, right? So those are the things that I'm going to be bringing in. So anyway, kind of considering the stresses that we've been experiencing with our own kids, the most common and the most recent that I think that if you've been in our lives for the last year and a half, you've maybe heard either, in worship settings or whatever we've been updating, is our daughter Gwen. So if you don't know us very well, we have Jameson, and he's going to be 4 in August. And yes, he's our shy child running around. He's a bundle of fun and energy, and he quite often requires guidance on overly loving people.
Direction, yeah.
And so we quite often have to stop him from hugging strangers at the park and things like that. And Gwenny, and she sometimes gets kind of put under, like, she's the quiet one, the shy one, which actually in reality she's not. He's just that much bolder than she is. Because as you get to know our daughter, even though she's not quite 2, she has some pieces of her that are quite bold and fun and energetic, and she's spunky. She'll push her brother right over the edge, and she knows it already. But the big thing with her lately has been food. So everything totally normal. We've never had any issues with nursing or anything like that when she was born. Perfectly healthy pregnancy, perfectly healthy. Even now, you could argue she's perfectly healthy. But right around that 6 months is when they say, hey, time to start introducing food. And we kind of did it a little early, and I was just eager because I was excited.
She looked like she wanted it.
And so we did. And then we realized maybe not. So we backed off a little bit. We started somewhere around 7-8 months and nothing, not wanting it, fighting everything we offered her. Okay, well, let's try this, fighting everything we offered her. So we, the other thing I didn't really say, like, we're both firstborns, and I know that it's not always the most important feature of a marriage and a family, but that adds an element of stress too, because we don't we don't outweigh each other's strengths and strengths and weaknesses. We both run right into the worst case scenario together, and we weigh each other down with it. So we don't have anybody going, hey, you know what? It's probably not that bad. So right around that 8 months, good Lord, she's not eating. So we're going to the doctor. So we go to the doctor, and they were. They were like, take it easy, she'll be okay, keep trying. We hit that year marker though, and still nothing. So had been seeing specialists. So at that stage, they send you to a speech pathologist, and they deal with the mouth. And long story short, we've been seeing specialists and all sorts of stuff for a very long time, and she just was not eating. And we'll kind of get a little bit more to how she's doing currently and what kind of has resulted, but that is what seems like trivial in public, just kind of like, oh yeah, this is, she's a good, healthy kid, but look at her, she's healthy. It is involved in every element of the day when, as the mom who is nursing her, that's the only way she was getting nutrition. So for moms out there that have nursed, I was all the way up until about a month ago nursing her every 2.5 hours through the night.
In the middle of the night, yeah.
As well, because it's the only nutrition she's getting, and it was like we tried spreading out, and then she got older and she needed more. So it was a stressor on the family because we're exhausted. I'm tired. I'm snapping a lot. And he's taking it a lot, but also snapping back a lot. So there's just a lot going on. There was a lot of us kind of swallowing down that stress in the moment because we can't just continue to live like this. And so instead of actually coming to God with it, we just chose to kind of like, well, then swallow it and mask it, and we'll figure this out later. And yes, God is with us. But so there was a lot of like handling stress not in a healthy way. Through that, and we even noticed, like, when you're thinking about how the family dynamic is, she felt it. I 100% believe now that she was feeling that, and that could have been leading to some of the problems we were having as well. Our son really started to show different behavioral signs that he was very aware, whether he had the words or not, that he was feeling a little neglected. All the attention's on her, right? So that kind of stress, without handling it well and laying it at God's feet, was becoming very like, hey, we're not handling this well, and the family is impacted by that. And so anyway, so as we were kind of looking at that, it became very aware that we do have a job to do in the family as parents to make sure that we are guiding how the family handles that stress. And it's not, we know that we're not perfect and we're going to make mistakes, but we were not a productive family we were not that productive family for Christ, if that makes sense. We looked like we had, like we still love Jesus, and we still are going to be teaching our kids about Jesus, and we still want to make sure we are living for God. But it wasn't prioritized within the family, and so the stress just built and built and built. Yep. And so we started kind of feeling really like, if it is our job as the parents in that immediate family to make sure that we are managing that stress in the way that we think is God called, because it not only just is going to impact the marriage, it's going to impact the kids and everything like that. So in hindsight, we kind of see that now. We kind of came to some different things on what it sounds kind of weird, but we started realizing, okay, there's going to be different ways that we're going to be handling stress within our marriage, so let's get that under control. And when we do, there's a job on us on how we handle showing the kids the way stress should be handled, so that they're learning it properly. Yep. But we kind of narrowed it into like 3 different stages, and I'm very aware. I'm not so arrogant to believe like I will have this. These are struggles for me. But
let's quickly run through.
Yeah. Them. So the protector is that first stage. So we kind of believe, just based on what we've been recognizing in just households and what we've been experiencing, that age 0 to 12-ish, our goal should be protecting our kids from the stressors that we might be experiencing as adults. Yep. They're in all of that we were experiencing. They were seeing the stress on us, and it was impacting them as well. And I firmly believe that's not for them to carry. Mm-hmm. That's not for them to be weighed down by, because they can't reason with it. They don't understand it at that stage. You could say 12, you're going to know your kids better, and we're going to know our kids better. But I do think that that stage is definitely one where you want to say, hey, the troubles that we face as adults should not be something that they are carrying. And this can be tricky, I know, for those of us that are young moms and dads out there right now. I know that it's there for the old ones too, but there's things going on in this world right now that we are all very aware are weighing us down.
There's just too much junk. I mean, if we're really honest. Yeah. And our job as parents is to keep that stress away from them. Yeah. Protect them from things that are, whether it's political things, the transgender movement, school choices, TV shows, you name it. Yeah. There's just kids are under attack. And as a youth pastor, I see that on the daily by the time they get to 6th grade, whether or not how parents have managed that stress. And if they know about that. Divorce. As someone who teaches a group of about 12 kids, and there's not a single one of them, their parents are still together, of the 12, lets you know that divorce is running rampant and families are under attack, and stress is a factor here.
Those are things you can't hide from your kids, I recognize, but that should be approached with caution on how it's being handled at that stage, in our opinion, and that those bigger things, we are called to protect our kids from them, but they don't need to be feeling the stress that we might have about it. My kids don't need to know why I'm not letting you watch the Spidey episode 3. Like, you don't need to know why there's a couple of characters that that live a life we don't agree with. Like, nope, we're just not watching that. It's okay. We're going to move on from that. What's going on in that? Oh, nothing. We just don't think that that's showing God well. So we're going to move on from that. So anyway,
And
the next stage.
The next stage is that coaching stage, right? That's kind of where me as a youth pastor, I get them. That 13, Jocelyn said 20. I hope that they move out of the stage by 16, 17. And you as parents should also do your best to stretch that. Because stress is going to happen. Stress enters a teenager's life the moment junior high hits. Like, it just does. I don't know what it is, whether it's the skin breakouts, the awkwardness, the smells, you name it. But as a coach... as that coach, you want to be alongside of them.
Yeah.
You're right there. They're playing the game, but you're the one who's calling the timeouts and getting their center. When you call a timeout, it's the refocus into center.
Can I add something to that?
Yeah.
I do think, this is not necessarily, this is an opinion, and I do need to caveat that. I do think our current so specifically if you're kind of like leaning in the same space we are, I think our current parent, like the generation of parents, we really struggle today, even in the faith-based world, of this, like, this phrase gets thrown around like, oh, that's my daughter, that's my built-in best friend. No, she's not. She's not your best friend.
Yep.
And I can say that pretty strongly. I think that we really struggle with that because what ends up happening at this coaching stage, you're not showing them and guiding them on how to handle the stress that they're going to be handling in their own life. You're trying to eliminate it from them like a friend would. And so you do kind of tend to do these things that are like, we're really proud that they came to me and talked to me about this. But now what we've done is, okay, they came and talked to me about this, which is important. Don't get me wrong. I want my kids to be able to come to me if there's a problem at school or if there's something causing stress for them. But then we land it there, and we don't guide them on who they should be going to with that stress, and we just feel proud that they came to us, and now we're the ones handling their stress for them, and they're not taking it to God, and it hasn't been modeled to them that you go to God with this stress, and it hasn't been coached back to them. Hey, thank you for talking to me about this. That was, I'm glad that you're feeling comfortable enough to have you talk to God about this. What do you feel like he's telling you about this? And I do think that ages 13 to 20, like that is something that kids can be figuring out how to do.
For sure. And the last stage that we kind of see, it's that cheerleading stage, where some of you, probably the majority of Living Hopers live, where you have kids that are now in what we call the adult stage of life, hopefully, and you get to be their cheerleader. You get to root them on. You get to cheer for them. You get to be a part of it. It's kind of interesting through the stress of Gwenny and all of those things. Our parents were phenomenal of coming alongside. And we'll talk more about that later. And as you could see, as the kids have a thing, the other thing is the stress on a family also, unfortunately, reaches grandparents. It really does. I'm not a grandparent. I look forward to the day to doing that because then I get to go, here, change this. Here, put this to bed. I don't have to spend the whole night up all the time with our grandkids. But just because of that, I started to think about what that does on grandparents and how you see the stress. Whether you out in these Living Hopers or you at home are grandparents, you have to understand that the stress that you are seeing in your kids is their stress. And so what I would challenge you to do is not interject or intercept or any of that, but to just come alongside them. And remember what Genesis said, that is why a man leaves his father and mother and is untied to his wife. United, untied, wow. That'd be great. A mother is united, united to his wife, and they become one flesh, right? It's that idea of leaving, and they've created their own family and their own stressors. And it's just a thing that I see, and grandparents, there's some amazing grandparents in this room, and I know that to be true because you guys almost have adopted our kids as well. And it's that idea of instead of standing in the way and being that protector, remember you're the cheerleader. You're supposed to be there as a parent, as that parent to root them on, to encourage them, to let them know that they'll be okay, to support them in prayer, and to sometimes just listen. It's so funny how many times, like my wife said, she likes to talk, and and her mom talk quite often. And when they talk, there's so many times when I'm listening to Jocelyn talk to her mom, and her mom's giving her advice, and I'm sitting here going, no, Jocelyn just wants to vent about how stupid her husband is. And that, at the end of the day, that's what I'm getting at is, as grandparents, we not me as a grandparent, but you as grandparents, we appreciate you guys being alongside us, not in front of us, not being the protector, but being the cheerleader. And as we see and as we look at Moses' life, and that's why there's so many different responses to stress, and that's why we want to touch on that in a family life. It's so different, and what we see. What's going on from there is moving from Moses. We want to spend some time looking at David real quickly. And David's big issue that I want to dwell on is not necessarily him being chased down and hunted, and that's stressful. Not necessarily David and Goliath, not necessarily all those things, but it's the way in which he also responded to stress in this Bathsheba situation. David, knowing full well the David story, he messed up. And we're going to quickly read this. In the spring of the time kings go off to war, David didn't. He sent Joab to the king of men and the whole Israelite army. They destroyed the Ammonites and besieged Red, but David remained in Jerusalem. He messed up right there. That's one of his big issues and cause of his own stress. And he then on an evening in which David got up from his bed, walked around on the rooftop place. On the rooftop across the way, he saw a woman bathing. The woman was very beautiful, and David sent someone to find out about her. The man said, "She is Bathsheba, the daughter of Elon, the wife of Uriah, the Hittite." You can see where this is going if you've never heard this story. I'm just going to give you what I call the Josh summary. And what happens is David, of course, takes her in, and he impregnates her, and then he tries to cover it up by having Uriah come back from the battle and quote-unquote sleep with his wife, but Uriah didn't enter the room. And so when that plan failed, he made it worse and worse and worse, and he caused a stressful situation to just grow and grow and grow and grow. And when he then had Uriah, okay, well, if Uriah's not going to sleep with him, then I'll just get rid of him altogether. And they took Uriah, a pretty decent captain in the army, and stuck him on the front lines where he died. And so Uriah is now dead, and David is at a point in his life where he's trying to cover it up. He's trying to do all those things, and he gets called out eventually here in 2 Samuel 12. There we go. 2 Samuel 12, the prophet Nathan comes to him and calls him out on it after his shortcomings. Then David said to Nathan, "I have sinned against the Lord." After Nathan called him out on it, "The Lord has taken away your sin. You are not going to die. But because by doing this you have shown utter contempt for the Lord, the son born to you will die." After Nathan had gone home, the Lord struck down the child that Uriah's wife had been born to David, and he became ill. David pleaded with God for the child. He fasted and spent the nights lying in sackcloth on the ground. And we see David's response. There's two gigantic David's responses to this story of stress, and that's one, he fasted. Knowing full well that the pain was going to be there because he lost the child. Knowing full well that no matter what, he kept on asking for forgiveness. Even though Nathan said he was forgiven, he prayed and talked with God and forgo eating. Then the second thing that we see actually in a different book is found in Psalm 51, is he worshiped. He worshiped. The title of Psalm 51 at the very beginning of your Bible says a psalm of after Nathan calling out David. And he writes one of my favorite psalms ever because it's so redemptive, it's so real, it's so honest, and it's actually a gigantic prayer. And it's have mercy on me, O God, according to your unfailing love, according to your great compassion, blot out my transgressions, wash away all my iniquity, cleanse me from my sin. And then verse 10, create in me a clean heart, O God, and renew a steadfast spirit within me. And I see that as a gigantic prayer. And his heart is just so vulnerable and he's just so there. He's in the moment and he's going, God created me a clean heart. And it's all because he fasted and prayed during a stressful time in his life. And unfortunately, that stressful time in his life can be long periods of pain. Long periods of pain. When Nathan calls him out, he then tells him that his child is going to be lost. I've never lost a child, but I imagine that pain is an everyday experience. It's an everyday experience. And so sometimes the stressful things can last a long period of pain in our own lives. And that worshiping fasting is going to be crucial and huge. And of course, pain, I don't know if you know this, we found this out in last month. Pain, of course, can create stress, but also the reverse is true. You know that your stress can turn into pain? Jocelyn found that out the hard way, didn't you? You want to share a little bit?
Yeah, I've been living with that for a while, but yeah, I mean, that's I think what I loved about Joseph's approach to this, because I've had what we thought was just kind of a health condition for years. I think I was 18 years old. Like Josh said, I went to school in Oklahoma, and while I was out there, we decided to take a trip, and I came down with, we swore was appendicitis. My right side was just on fire. I just was in a lot of pain, and I was
19?
feeling sick. I was 18 or 19.
Yeah.
Yeah, 19. So we find an ER in Dallas, Texas, because we were in Dallas, Texas, and they had nothing for me. They said that that's not what was going on. They sent me out. And eventually I overcame it. It was fine. Got home, and I'd spent all of 19, all the way through, I'm 34 now, with this flare-up thing. We looked at diet, we looked at all sorts of things, and nothing really, no conclusion. They did tests, they never found anything, and it was always the exact same thing. I'd start to kind of feel like I was coming down with something, and then my right side would kind of flare up, and I'd be in pain for about 3 or 4 days, and it would wipe me out. I was doing a lot of coaching over the last decade or more. I was doing a lot of work and things like that, and it would be like, I'm not coming into work today. I can't physically stand or walk. And so this went on for a long time, and the only thing we were able to connect it to was stress. So I'd go on these long trips for volleyball, I'd come home, and I'd come down with this. There'd be stuff going on with my family, and I would have just had a big blowout. Maybe my mom and dad, and some stuff was going down, and I was amping up with it, and then I'd come down with this. So it happened about 2 or 3 times a year, sometimes in the rough years. After Jameson, despite kids being quite stressful, I was, I guess, internalizing the stress different. I hadn't had it happen in a while. But about 6 weeks ago, I came down with it again. We call it a flare-up because there was no other answer for it. And it was bad. It was the worst one I'd ever experienced. And I told him, I said, I think we're going to have to go in for this. So we did. And long story short, they were great. We went to Kaiser, and this is for sure appendicitis. And I told her, I said, that's really interesting, because I have been dealing with flare-ups of this for years, and they said that they couldn't find it, or it wasn't appendicitis. And she was pretty well, it may not have been your appendix all those other times. And God bless her, she was probably just trying to save her behind.
Yeah.
But I felt very confidently in that moment, God saying, hey, listen, this is a prayer answered. You've been asking for an answer on this. I'm answering this for you. And this is it. And you're going to get this taken care of. And so it was one of those things we realized it does cycle itself. It's okay, that stress was actually causing some of my physiological problems. And I know that that's pretty common too. I've looked at other stuff, and your brain functioning can be impaired by stress. Not just, hey, in the moment, but actually causing some different, weakened verbal memory, things like that. It can impair your immune system. It can cause cardiovascular impairment, different things like that. And it's something that our body really wasn't, while we were made in his image, we weren't really meant to carry the stress that way. And I think especially in our culture here in the United States, we don't know how to, we're so go all the time that the stress kind of takes hold, and it can kind of cause some of those problems. So anyway, yeah, that was one of those things.
And when that happened,
Yeah.
The appendicitis was this world-changing event for
Yes.
us. It's crazy. She asked me, she's like, hey, when did that happen? 6 weeks ago. It was June 9th. I have it in my calendar. I have a gigantic star next to it, because it was the start of something drastic in our family life. Because as appendicitis hits, that means Gwenny and her nursing was done. I mean, it just had to be. Jocelyn was going to be in recovery for a little bit. As you well know, nursing means laying on the stomach. You can't have any pressure on the stomach. And so we devised the plan to essentially keep Gwenny away from Jocelyn for a week. And you want to share a little bit about that?
Yeah, so the funny thing, this kind of diverts us a little bit, but it kind of shows how God answered prayer for us through this stress. So we had our ups and downs of coming to God with this, recognizing that we're kind of failing our family a little bit by not handling the stress well, and kind of seeking God in it. There were nights of us crying out to God going, we're really just sick of this and exhausted. Why are you not fixing this? And kind of coming to that conclusion. That would mean you fixing a person, and she has her own free will at this too, even though she's little. And so there's pieces of that to consider. But there was a lot of crying out to God on that. And so it really is just kind of a cool testimony to the fact that God kind of answered 2 prayers for us in a way that maybe we didn't want happened. It would have been lovely to go to the doctor and find out, hey, you know that whole thing you've been dealing with, it's your appendix. You don't have to deal with this anymore. Let's take it out. No, I had to actually come down with appendicitis for it. And we'd been praying for weeks about how we were going to handle this with Gwen and the food. It was kind of getting to a point where it's like, we've got to do something now. We can't just continue to mess with the doctors on this. Months back, probably back up to March, I felt very, I was wrestling with God on this one night, and I kind of felt like I was asking, like, I want to fully trust you in this. And he was like, okay, good, drop the doctors. And I was like,
no way.
Yeah, so I brought it to Josh.
That's just where my faith was, if I'm real.
Yeah, the honest place was that Josh was not there. And this kind of brings back to family dynamics, and we'll kind of come to this, kind of bringing back to what Barry talked about last week. I really wrestle with the idea of submission in a marriage, mainly because I think most of us women kind of still, like, what exactly does that look like? And I think a lot of women have an idea, well, that means he's out working all the time, or that means he's, like, we all kind of have this, like, convoluted version of what submission looks like. And I very, very strongly in that moment felt God say, hey, listen, you need to just follow his lead on this. And I'm going, but I felt like you told me to be done with the doctors. Like, I'm very confused. Like, and I think our world kind of does this thing where, especially I notice this in the faith-based world a lot. Like, if you're really around a lot of women that love Jesus, like, at all costs protect your kids, even if it means trampling on your husband's leadership. And I kind of felt like I'm not supposed to do this right now. And I know that this is maybe putting my kid at risk, but I'm going to take a chance on this and trust that God meant that. Like, okay, follow his lead. So we waited a few months. And come the first week of June, it was my turn. Josh and I trade off going to prayer on Wednesday night here up at the church. So come on up. It's coming up in a couple weeks. And hopefully this pushes you to want to come. So I do what I always do when I go. I don't really necessarily engage much in, like, any outward prayer. I really just enjoy being a part of the body, and mainly because I don't ever feel God calling me to anything, and that could just be because I was always tired. But somebody felt, no, this is enough for this woman, and God bless him for it, but Coop stepped up and he was like, I think we need to pray for Jocelyn. And I don't know what his call was on that or what God was calling him to on that, but I very lovingly had some amazing people in leadership and men and women in this church that came and prayed for me. I could not tell you everything that they prayed about word for word. I very clearly heard God say, go home, you're dropping the doctors. Because I was feeling like, and this is us. I would never say just drop your doctors if you're in the middle of a medical whatever. Yeah. We know based on our struggles with stress that we want to believe that we were seeking God in things, but we still had our finger on the outside, and it was not allowing us to fully trust in God. So I come home, I tell Josh, and I was like, I don't know. I was scared to tell him because I knew he said no last time. No,
I put the kids to bed, and the first thing you said was, I was like, how'd prayer go? And you go, we need to drop the doctors. I was like, okay.
And that was
I guess we're done. And
then the next day I got appendicitis. And it was very much like, we're dropping the doctors.
We're grinning because we need someone to fix your appendix.
And it was a weird thing of, like, God was kind of going, you've been praying fervently for this, and even if you felt like you weren't doing it well, I know that this is your heart, and I've been here for you this whole time. I'm going to take care of this. And I'm going to take care of this. And you're not going to like how this is going to go down, but I'm taking care of it for you. And with appendicitis, she had to come out, and God bless the Mullers. God bless the Mullers.
Thank you, Amanda and Derek.
Thank you, Amanda and Derek. They had Gwenny for about 3 and 4 days. Barry and Colleen were involved. I got videos that would just send me into this whirlwind of just, like, crying because she was trying different things and doing different things, and it kind of turned into, you're done nursing. And this is it, and she's going to figure this out. And she did, and we'll kind of come to that a little bit, but she's been doing very well. We're not in a place that, yes. It was not the way I wanted it to go down. I had this vision of God, let me just like any of my other, I just want to gradually be done with nursing and have that moment with her, and that was not the case. But she is healthy. She's gaining weight again. There was some time in there where she wasn't. We ended up finding out in the middle of all that she had an ear infection that we didn't catch, and so she wasn't eating for that reason as well. But she's got some foods that she's actually taking and eating. She's willing to take multivitamins. She's doing so well. We've just been so blessed by those answered prayers. But it took a little bit of working together as a couple on how we handle this stress well and what that looks like within the household.
And as you can see, in our lives, we've kind of taken these characters and applied them to our stress. And what we can all kind of, real quickly, I want to run through 3 points of our application. And I need you to understand and know that, like, we understand that the majority of these points is like no-brainers, but you have to recognize and realize that stress is going to come. Stress is going to come. I mean, Jesus said it himself. I've told you these things so that in me you may have peace. Yeah. And in this world you will have trouble. Yeah. But take heart, I have overcome the world. Mm-hmm. And so you have to understand also you got to help out a little bit and don't do your best to go seek out those stressful situations, but you're going to have them. And you have to understand and remember that each family has a role in this. Kids are going to be a part of it. I mean, you got to, excuse me. If you missed last week, make sure you watch last week's to understand. Yep. Men need to lead and love, and women need to submit. That's just a biblical basis. Yep. And children need to obey. Like there's some things going on there for sure that we all have a role. We see here. Oh, sorry, I went backwards. And we see here the last one that I just want to briefly touch on that I feel like some of us at Living Hope might be missing out on is the seeking God. We all could do better at seeking God, myself included. And I see that in the 2 ways in which David kind of did it. He worshiped, fasted, and prayed, right? Like that was why David was a key point to us. And that idea right here of Romans 12:12 is you need to be joyful in hope, patient in affliction. It doesn't just happen overnight. It doesn't. We were wanting that to be the case for Gwen. We were wanting to, 6 months into this, she's not eating. All right, pray. We'll bring her forward up here at church. We'll pray for her once, and bam, it was done. That wasn't the case. The other thing that I see when it comes to seeking God with your family is that family, Jocelyn said immediate family, but I feel like church family is huge when it comes to bringing others to prayer. We've gotten a lot of attention, and there's some Sundays where we feel bad because we've gotten a lot of attention praying for Gwenny, knowing full well that this congregation, that Living Hope, has some dire prayer needs, and then it seems like everybody, because we have the microphone, knows what we're going through. And me and Jocelyn ourselves have gone, but we don't know everything you guys are going through. And so what I would encourage you to do, no matter what it is, if it's a health scare, if it's a frustration, if it's a prodigal in your life, no matter what it is, if it's a stressful situation that you need prayer for, I challenge you to let you know that the leadership team and the people in this building love you dearly and are come ready to pray. They've come ready to pray and seek God and to stand in the gap for you. Because what I will say is during those times of text messages of Gwenny's not being with us, but with other people, there was also a prayer message going, and man, we felt it. There wasn't a moment in which I had a doubt in my mind that the surgery would have complications for Jocelyn. There wasn't a moment in which I ever thought that Gwenny would then not begin to eat her food. There were obstacles and challenges, yes, but the prayer was felt. And so I challenge you, when it comes to seek God with your family, if you're feeling the heaviness, especially the married couple that you are, bring that to the Living Hopers here. We'll pray alongside you. We'll be there with you through it. Seek God first, don't get me wrong. You two bring it to God and pray. But then also, bring it to your church family. Let us stand with you in those things. And with that being said, I just thank you guys for letting us share and give us our ears. I know we went a little long, but man, we felt like God was doing something here, and I'd like to close this in prayer. God, you are so good. I thank you for this morning. I thank you for this time spent. And we know that there are stressful situations in family life and how we can manage and maintain them. And God, we're so thankful that at least for me and Jocelyn, as we continue in our marriage and putting forward that family life, help us to manage that stress well, but help living hopers too as well. To one, realize and know and acknowledge that stress is going to come. It's just a part of life. But every family member has a different role in that. And that 3, that we would seek you, God, in those stressful times. Those are the times we spend more in prayer, worship, and reading our Bible. God, you are so good. We thank you for this morning. Pray all this in your Son's name. Amen.